Perfect. I have the full transcript. Now I'll write the new story with completely new names not in the list. Names I'll use no LTH. New trash ones. I'll use narrator equals first person. I husband equals Reed. Brother equals Colt. Mom equals my mother. Dad equals my father. Grandma equals my grandmother. Secondary. Weston cousin. Allie work friend. Dr. Pratt doctor. None of these appear in the banned list. Let me write now. The doctor called it a routine pre-op appointment. That was the phrase he used, like we were talking about a car inspection and not the reason I had spent the last 4 months learning to breathe through fear. I remember sitting in that waiting room the morning after my surgery was confirmed, staring at a potted plant in the corner that probably hadn't been watered since the Obama administration, thinking, at least my family will be there. At least I have that. I didn't know yet what Reed had found. I didn't know yet what my brother had taken. My name is Noelle. No, wait. My name doesn't matter as much as the shape of this story, so let me start where it actually started. I'm 32. I work in healthcare administration for a regional hospital network, which is a polished way of saying I spend my days making sure complicated systems don't collapse under their own weight. I'm good at spotting cracks before they become ruptures. I'm good at building things that hold. I just apparently couldn't see the cracks in my own family until they opened up wide enough to swallow $74,000. I grew up in a mid-sized city in Colorado, the oldest of 2. My brother Colt is 3 years younger, and from the time he was old enough to ask for things, he was never told no in a way that stuck. My parents ran a successful commercial landscaping business, the kind that contracts with office parks and city municipalities, recession-proof, steady, built over 20 years of early mornings. We weren't flashy rich, we were quietly comfortable. And in our house, that comfort had a direction. It flowed toward Colt. My mother called it personality. She said Colt needed more encouragement because he was sensitive. My father called it investment. He said Colt had potential that just needed the right conditions. I called it Tuesday, because that's what it was. Every single Tuesday and Wednesday and Sunday dinner and holiday morning. The axis of our family tilting slightly, always slightly, toward my brother like a plant bending toward light. I was the lamp that provided the light. Useful, present, expected to stay on. Reed and I got engaged 2 winters ago on a Thursday evening in our apartment kitchen when he'd made dinner badly on purpose just to make me laugh. He wasn't the kind of person who engineered proposals at mountain overlooks or spelled things out in flower petals. He was the kind of person who saw that I'd had a terrible week and decided the best thing he could give me was something to laugh about. He proposed with a ring he'd been carrying in his jacket pocket for 3 weeks, waiting for a moment that felt like us. That was the moment. We set a date 8 months out. A Saturday in late September, because the leaves in Colorado in late September look like the world is on fire in the best possible way. We booked a venue outside Denver, an old estate property with a stone patio and a barn that had been converted into a reception hall. We paid the deposit. We signed the contract. I made a binder. I am the kind of person who makes binders. My mother cried on the phone when I told her. Happy tears, she insisted. Though in my family, it was always hard to tell the difference between happy and relieved. My father asked about catering before he asked about the venue. Colt texted me a single thumbs-up emoji and then asked if the bar would be open during the ceremony. For a few months, everything was fine. My mother got involved the way she always did when something had the potential to reflect well on the family. Enthusiastically at first, with opinions about florals and font choices, and then gradually, as I made decisions without consulting her, with a kind of pointed silence. I'd learned to navigate that silence the way you learn to navigate a kitchen in the dark, by memory, carefully, without turning on a light that might wake someone up. Then in June, about 2 months before the wedding, my mother called on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk, a spreadsheet open on one monitor, a cup of coffee going cold beside me. Her name lit up my phone and I answered without thinking. So she said, in the tone she used when she'd already rehearsed the conversation, "Your brother got into that expedition?" I blinked. "What expedition?" "You know, the one he's been talking about." She said it the way people say, "you know," when they're assuming credit for information they never actually shared. "The International Mountaineering Program. He got his spot confirmed." I waited. "It's in September," she said. And there it was, not a question, not an apology for what was coming, just a fact dropped into the air between us like a stone into water, and I was supposed to watch the ripples and understand that I was expected to move. Our wedding is in September, I said. I know, sweetheart. The sweetheart landed like a sedative, but this is a real opportunity for him. These programs fill up for years in advance. He's been trying to get into one for so long. Mom! My voice was careful, practiced. We booked this venue 8 months ago. Invitations went out. People have flights. I understand that, she said in a tone that made very clear she did not understand that. But you have to think about how this looks for Colt. This is a career thing. This is his future. My wedding is my future. Don't be dramatic. She said it gently, which was somehow worse. I'm just asking you to consider whether the date is flexible. The date was not flexible. We both knew the date was not flexible. The question was never really about flexibility. It was about whether I would fold, like I usually did, and reframe the folding as generosity. I didn't fold. We're not changing the date, I said. Silence. Let me talk to your father, she said finally, and hung up. My father called the next morning. He didn't bother with warmth. He never did when he'd already decided on a verdict. Your brother has put in the work for this, he said. Like I'd challenged him at a board meeting, he earned this spot. And I booked a venue a year ago, I said. I have a signed contract. You have flexibility, he said. You choose not to use it. I choose not to blow up 8 months of planning for a trip he could do next year. My father exhaled. Long, deliberate, the exhale of a man who considered patience a form of condescension. You have always done this, he said. Made yourself the center. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to go back to every Christmas and birthday and family dinner where I'd made myself smaller and smaller until I was practically invisible and hold all of those moments up like evidence. Instead, I said, I'm not changing the date, Dad. Then don't be surprised, he said, if your family can't be there. He didn't say it loudly. He never had to. The words were small and blunt, and they landed exactly where he aimed them. Okay, I said, okay. He sounded almost thrown. If that's what you need to do, I said, okay. I hung up and sat very still for a long time, staring at a framed photo on my desk, Reed and me, at a trailhead 2 summers ago, both squinting into the sun, laughing at something I can't remember anymore. My hands were steady, my eyes were dry. I had spent so many years learning not to bleed in front of people that I sometimes forgot the wound was still there. That night I told Reed everything. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about him. He doesn't perform listening, he actually does it. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. How did Colt pay for this? He asked. I frowned. What? These international mountaineering programs. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. They're not cheap. Equipment, instruction, travel. We're talking 10, 15,000 minimum, probably more. I opened my mouth to say my parents help him, but the words sat wrong. Reed watched my face. Do you remember the trust account? He asked carefully. The trust account. I'd heard it mentioned twice in my life. Once, when I was about 12, my grandmother had taken me aside after Sunday dinner and said something about wanting me to have a foundation, something solid for when I needed it. The second time was shortly after she passed away. My father had mentioned it briefly, said it was being managed, said not to worry about it. I had not worried about it. I had trusted, because in my family trust was not a choice so much as an expectation, presented as love. I remember it, I said. Do you have anything in writing? I searched my memory. My dad said it was handled. Reed's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. I want to look into it, he said. Will you let me? I wanted to say it was probably fine. I wanted to smooth it over the way I smoothed everything over. But I looked at my husband and thought about the fact that he had never once asked me to be smaller, and I said, yes. Reed is an actuary. His entire professional life is about finding the place where numbers stop lying. He spent the next 3 weeks doing what he does quietly, requesting documents, cross-referencing filings, making calls in the calm, even voice that makes people think they're having a routine conversation when they are very much not. One Sunday night, while I was folding laundry in the bedroom, he called me to the kitchen. He had his laptop open on the table. He turned it to face me without preamble. I looked at the screen. It was a transaction record, clean, clinical, with the kind of font that belongs on forms you sign without reading. Amount, $74,000. Transfer date, 7 months prior. Recipient, a personal account and Colt's name. Memo, family distribution. I read it twice. Then again. That's mine, I said, not as a question. I already knew. Yes, Reed said. The kitchen felt very quiet. Outside, a car went past and its headlights swept across the window and disappeared. I thought about my grandmother's hands, dry and warm, holding mine when I was small. I thought about the word foundation. I thought about the fact that she had wanted me to have something that was mine, and the people I trusted most had taken it and called it a family decision. Does Colt know it was mine? I asked. Reed's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He clicked to the next document on the screen. It was a text thread, pulled from records I didn't ask about, a conversation between my brother and my father from around the time of the transfer. Just use the trust money, Colt had written. She's probably going to ask for it for the wedding anyway, and then it'll be a whole thing. Better to just handle it now. My father's response already done. I stared at those 2 lines for a long time, not because they were hard to understand, but because they were so easy to. There was no confusion in it, no accidental misunderstanding to forgive. Colt knew. He knew it was mine. He knew it was meant for a major life moment, exactly the kind of moment I was currently planning, and he had suggested taking it anyway, and my father had already done it. I wasn't the lamp they'd forgotten to turn off. I was the circuit they'd quietly rerouted. The next morning, I texted Colt and asked if he wanted to get breakfast. He said sure, named a diner near his apartment, showed up 10 minutes late in a jacket I recognized because I'd been with my mother when she bought it for him. We ordered coffee. He talked about the expedition for a while, the altitude, the team, the gear. He was genuinely excited the way he always was when something was happening for him. I watched him speak and thought about how easy enthusiasm is when someone else is paying for it. When he paused for coffee, I said, "Did you take money from my trust fund?" He went very still. Then he laughed, short and defensive the way people laugh when they're buying time. "Where is this coming from?" "A bank transfer," I said. $74,000. 7 months ago. His expression shifted through 3 or 4 things in quick succession: surprise, recalculation, irritation, before landing somewhere that looked like practiced innocence. "That was a family decision," he said. "Dad managed that account. That's between you and him. You texted him and suggested it." A pause. "I don't know what you think you saw." "I saw exactly what I saw," I said. My voice was even. Something in me had finally gotten tired enough of softness to stop reaching for it. "You told Dad to take money that was designated for me, for my wedding or my future, and he did it, without telling me, while asking me to reschedule my wedding to accommodate your trip." Colt leaned back, crossed his arms, looked at me the way people look at someone they've always seen as manageable who has suddenly stopped being manageable. "You're being really intense about this," he said. "I'm being accurate," I said. "You have a good job. You have Reed. You're fine." He picked up his mug. "I actually needed that money. The program doesn't wait for people to be ready. Neither did I." He set the mug down. Something flickered in his face, the beginning of guilt maybe, or just the shadow of it. Then it passed. "Look," he said, lowering his voice like we were conspirators, "if you make this a big deal, it's going to hurt the whole family. Mom and Dad are going to blame themselves, and it becomes a whole." "It already is a big deal," I said. "I just didn't know it yet." I left money on the table for my coffee and walked out. The morning of my wedding, September air sat crisp and golden over the estate property. The trees along the fence line were just starting to turn amber and copper at the edges, still green at the heart. The barn had been transformed into something warm and lit and quiet, ready for the 180 people who would fill it in a few hours. Reed's mother found me in the bridal suite early and took my hands without saying anything and looked at me in a way that made my eyes sting. "You ready?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and I meant it more completely than I'd meant anything in a long time. My parents arrived, which surprised me. I had half expected them not to. They sat in the front row. My mother wore a lavender dress she'd bought specifically for today. My father wore a suit and the expression of someone attending a function he resents being obligated to. They did not speak to me before the ceremony. They did not seek me out. The ceremony began. I walked myself down the aisle, a decision I'd made quietly months ago that I told no one except Reed. Some guests looked confused. A few looked moved. I kept my eyes on my husband at the end of that path, and he looked at me like I was the whole point of the room. We were halfway through the vows when my mother stood up. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The movement alone, deliberate, staged, pulled every eye in the room. My father rose beside her. He smoothed his jacket. Then he looked at me, and in a voice designed to carry, he said, "We won't be part of this." My mother was already turning away. I stood at the altar and watched my parents walk out of my wedding the same way they'd always walked away from anything inconvenient. Cleanly, with the absolute confidence that their exit would hurt more than staying. 180 people held their breath. The officiant glanced at me. My maid of honor made a small sound from my left. I felt Reed's hands tighten slightly around mine, steady and warm, a question and an answer at the same time. I turned back to him. "Keep going," I said to the officiant, and we did. We said our vows. We said "I do." Reed kissed me and someone in the crowd started clapping, and then everyone did, the kind of relieved applause that comes from watching a person refuse to break. I smiled into the sound of it and let myself be held. The reception moved the way receptions do. Dinner, dancing, speeches from people who loved us, the soft chaos of a room full of happy people. I let myself be in it. I let myself eat and laugh and press my cheek against my husband's shoulder during a slow song, while outside the Colorado mountains went dark against an orange sky. And then Reed stood up. He didn't tap his glass. He didn't preface it with a joke. He just stood, picked up the microphone from the speaker's table, and waited for the room to settle. It took a few seconds, then it was quiet enough to hear the string lights hum. "I want to say something," he said, "before we go any further tonight." The room listened. After what had happened at the ceremony, people were primed for something. They didn't know what. Neither did I. Though I'd known for weeks this moment was possible, had agreed to it, had sat beside Reed late at night while he decided whether to pull this thread and watched him decide that silence had already cost us enough. "You saw my wife's parents leave this afternoon," Reed said. His voice was calm the way still water is calm, not because nothing is happening beneath it. "I think you deserve to know why." He clicked a button on the laptop at the table beside him. Behind him, on the projection screen where a wedding slideshow had been scrolling, a new image appeared. A transaction record, clean, clinical, $74,000. A murmur moved through the room like wind. "My wife's grandmother left her a trust fund," Reed said, "for a major life moment, a wedding, a home, a future." He paused just long enough for the room to register that something had gone very wrong. 7 months before this wedding, that money was transferred to her brother's personal account for an international trip. The murmur deepened. Someone near the back said something quietly. A fork clinked. Reed clicked again. The text thread appeared on screen. Colt's message: "Just use the trust money. She's probably going to ask for it for the wedding anyway." I watched the room read it. I watched the moment it landed the way it tends to land when cruelty is displayed plainly, without context that softens it. People's faces shifted. The couple at the table nearest me, friends from work, looked at each other and then back at the screen. "Her parents were told," Reed continued, "and they agreed to it. They managed the account. They authorized the transfer. And then, while planning this wedding, they asked her to move the date, so her brother could still take his trip." His voice didn't rise. "When she said no, they called it selfishness. When she still said no, they told her today was meant to teach her humility." The room was very still. Reed looked at me. In front of 180 people, he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. "She didn't beg them to stay," he said. "She didn't cancel the wedding. She finished her vows and married me because she has more grace in her than most people will carry in a lifetime, a breath. But I'm not going to stand here and let the people she loves most walk out of this room, having gotten away with it quietly." Someone near the front started crying. I wasn't sure who. My own eyes were burning and I was pressing my thumbnail into my palm to stay level. The demand letter goes Monday, Reed said. The fund will be restored. And I'm telling all of you because she has spent her whole life carrying things alone that she never should have had to carry. He set the microphone down. For a moment, no one moved. Then Reed's aunt started clapping, just twice, 3 times, and then the whole room was applauding, not the polished applause of a party, but something raw, the sound of people choosing a side. I pressed my fingers to my mouth. I looked at my husband and thought, this is what it feels like to be defended by someone who has nothing to gain from it and chooses to do it anyway. The tears came. I wiped them fast, embarrassed at myself, and then not embarrassed, because there was nothing embarrassing about finally putting something down. After the reception, while we were still in the venue parking lot with our shoes off, waiting for our car, Reed's cousin Weston found us. He's a quiet guy, a few years older than Reed, the kind of person who watches a room and says very little. He'd been at the ceremony, he'd seen everything. He put a hand on my shoulder. I didn't know, he said simply. Any of us who were connected to your family, we didn't know it was like that. I thought about all the ways it had been invisible, all the meals where I'd smiled, all the phone calls where I'd stayed calm, all the moments I'd translated cruelty into something manageable because I'd been taught that was maturity. I didn't know either, I said. Not how clearly, not until I saw it written down. He nodded once and walked back to his car. The demand letter went out Monday morning. My parents called that afternoon. My mother's voicemail was long and shaking, the kind of message that sounds like grief but is mostly indignation wearing grief's clothes. How could you do this to our family, she said, in front of everyone, like we're criminals. My father's message was shorter. 3 sentences. You've made your choice. Don't expect us to pretend otherwise. We're done. Colt didn't call. He texted. 2 words. Are you serious? I typed back, completely. The process took months. There were lawyers and documents and conversations conducted through intermediaries because none of us were willing to be in the same room. My parents called it betrayal. They called it a public attack. They called it the kind of thing you don't do to family. I thought about all the things that had been done to me that were never called anything at all. The restitution agreement was signed in December. The trust fund was restored and restructured with independent oversight, language that my grandmother would have appreciated had she known it was necessary. My parents never apologized, not really. My mother left a message in January that was technically an apology, the way a permission slip is technically a form of consent. Technically, if you don't look closely. I stopped calling. I didn't announce it. I didn't write a letter explaining my position. I just let the distance grow from something that hurt into something that breathed, the way a scar does after enough time, still there. Changed shape, no longer an open thing. Spring came, and Reed and I drove up to the mountains for a weekend. Just the 2 of us, and sat on a cabin porch in the cold with coffee and blankets, and watched the sun come up over a ridge that looked like it had been there since before anyone thought to have feelings about anything. Are you okay? He asked at some point. I thought about it genuinely, the way he always made me think about things genuinely. I think I'm becoming okay, I said. He nodded like that was the right answer. There's a photo from our wedding that sits on the dresser in our bedroom. It was taken right after we said, I do, in the few seconds between the vow and the kiss, when I'm looking at Reed and he's looking at me and neither of us is performing anything. Just 2 people in the middle of something real. If you look carefully in the background, you can see the 2 empty chairs in the front row. People ask sometimes, they ask if the whole thing ruined the day, if I wish it had gone differently. If I feel like my parents robbed me of something, I tell them the truth, which is that my parents tried to take a lot of things from me over the years. They tried to take the money. They tried to take the day. They tried to take my ability to believe I deserved to be defended. They got the money back. The day I kept. And when my husband stood up in front of everyone we love and said the things I had spent my whole life learning not to say out loud, what I felt wasn't humiliation or triumph or even relief, though it was all of those. What I felt, for the first time I could name, was the specific and unfamiliar feeling of not being alone in something that had always been mine to carry. That's not a small thing. That's everything. I used to think the hardest thing about growing up in a family like mine was not having a name for it, There was no single event I could point to, no one moment dramatic enough to justify how tired I always felt after holidays, after phone calls, after dinners where I smiled through things that quietly cost me something. It just looked like family. It looked like normal. And I was so well trained in accepting that normal as air that I never stopped to ask whether I was actually breathing. What I know now, having lived through the other side of it, is that the cost of silence is always compounding. Every time I folded, every time I translated my own pain into something more palatable for the people causing it, I was paying interest on a debt I never chose to carry. That's not weakness. I want to be clear about that. It takes an enormous amount of intelligence to survive a system that was designed to benefit from your compliance. What it takes even more of, though the thing I had to learn from scratch, is the wisdom to eventually stop. Cole didn't take $74,000 because he was careless. He took it because he had spent his entire life learning that taking from me had no consequences. My parents didn't walk out of my wedding because they were confused about priorities. They walked out because they had always operated on the assumption that I would absorb whatever they did and stay. The cruelty wasn't impulsive, it was practiced. And practiced cruelty only continues because the person absorbing it keeps making it comfortable. The moment I stopped making it comfortable, the moment Reed stood up in that reception hall and put the truth on a screen in front of everyone we loved, the whole architecture of it became visible, not just to the room, to me. For the first time, I could see the shape of what had been done, cleanly, without the gauze of family loyalty blurring the edges. And what I felt wasn't just anger. I felt something closer to grief for every version of myself that had accepted less than I deserved and called it keeping the peace. Here's what I've come to understand about cause and effect in the context of the people who raise us, what we allow, we teach, not consciously, not with a lesson plan, but in the accumulation of 1,000 small surrenders, we communicate to the people around us what we believe we're worth, and they respond accordingly. My parents and Colt responded to years of my quiet accommodation by believing, correctly at the time, that I would accommodate anything. The change happened not when I got louder. It happened when I got still. When I stopped explaining myself and started documenting. When I let the papers say what I had never been able to say out loud without being called dramatic. What Reed did that night wasn't just an act of love, though it was that completely. It was also an act of moral clarity. He saw a wrong and he named it, in public, at personal cost, without performing anger or seeking credit. That kind of integrity doesn't announce itself, it just acts. And watching someone do that for you, watching someone treat your dignity as worth defending, teaches you something you can't unlearn about what you deserve. I think about my grandmother sometimes, about what she meant when she said, "You have a good head, don't let them talk you out of it." I think she knew more than she could say. I think the trust fund was her way of trying to give me a floor to stand on. They took the money, but the floor she meant, the belief that I was worth protecting, worth telling the truth for, worth standing up in a room full of people and defending, that part they couldn't touch. I have it now. I'm keeping it.